good? Yeah. Happy? Baptism of fire.
Baptism of fire, yes.
So you had a bit of a baptism of fire?
I did have a bit of a baptism of fire. When I first left university, I moved to Swindon and worked for a contractor based in Swindon. Initially as an assistant site manager, but after about 3 months of being with the company, the site manager was suffering from a very bad case of rheumatoid arthritis and actually went off work for, well, pretty much permanently. Long-term leave, and there was no one else to take over the job from a site management point of view. So yours truly ended up by being that person.
Well, this was your first role.
It was my first role, yeah, very much so in the industry, and it was basically a series of apartments or flats for the Methodist Church in Swindon, centred around an existing church that was there. 3-storey building, 2 sides of the church and linked around the back of the church. And it was quite a complex job. But yeah, yours truly ended up by effectively becoming the site manager and then completed that project over a period of time. But obviously with that went a lot of challenges because I was completely new to the industry and was learning on my feet. As
what a great way to learn, hey George. So that first site, you never run one before?
No, that was the first time.
You were fresh out of uni?
Fresh out of uni, yeah.
Oh.
Very much so.
Okay.
So yeah, it was quite a large site. It was, value-wise, I can't remember now because it was going back, that was probably back in 1985, 86, something like that. But it was, I don't know what it was at the time. It was probably a couple of million, but relatively speaking nowadays, if you were doing it now, it probably would have been 7 or 8 million, something like that. Whilst I was still with that company, I then went on and did another project in the centre of Swindon, which was basically working on an existing store for WH Smiths. And that was slightly problematic because the company had cut some corners to try and, I suppose, save money and save time, really. Instead of putting a temporary roof on the job, they tried to temporary weather the roof. There were 4 existing light wells that ran down through the middle of the building, large light wells. And all the roof drainage focused on the light wells. I don't know, we had one of these 1 in 100-year storms at one point, and 2 of the light wells had been closed off and protected so that they could work inside them. So it basically meant all the roof water was being diverted to the 2 remaining light wells. Mm-hmm. I had this storm and basically everything cascaded down to these other 2 light wells. The store flooded inside completely.
Nice.
The senior PM that was on the job, which wasn't me, effectively got the sack. Yours truly ended up having to finish the job off. So
he got the sack for something that really wasn't his fault.
Exactly that, yeah, very much so. And I joined that project sort of a third or halfway through to help move it along and get it finished. So yeah, that was 2 baptisms of fire, if you like, really, because I had to pick up the pieces after what happened.
How does that shape then when you look at a new project now to go, okay, here's all the things that I need to consider and weigh up?
I suppose when you're looking at from a pre-construction point of view, when you're working on tenders and you're working to try and make sure that you cover everything and build everything into your tender to make sure that you're not compromising your position should you win it. You have to make sure that you meticulously go through the job from sort of top to bottom, understand what's involved, go through the drawings, go through the scope of works, ask questions. That's why we produce an information requirement schedule, design release schedule, all those sorts of things. Okay, some of those wouldn't manifest until you've actually secured the job, but certainly through the tender process, you would be asking questions, particularly if there's information that you can't find or information that's missing or you just can't see it, because you need to have the answers in order to be able to kind of try and put a robust tender together.
Yeah, so assuming I know nothing about pre-site, what does it look like? What does it entail?
Well, for me, pre-site, I mean, my role in terms of pre-site, certainly with Karma, is basically to work through the tenders with Peter, who's the estimator, understand the information, so go through the scope of works, go through the drawings in detail, put together a methodology and a method statement. So through the process of going through the drawings and going through the information, understand how you're going to build the job, create a strategy for building the job. put together a program. So build a program in your head and then start to put that onto the software package, which in our case we use MS Project. And actually build the program. Personally, I'm a builder in my background, so I like to build it as if I'm going to build it, if you see what I'm saying, rather than other people can just look at programs from a sort of more broader perspective. I have to think how I'm going to build it, and I'll build it that way. From that, having gone through the scope of works and all the information, actually start to build a method statement and a methodology as well. So, which effectively is the submission document that we put together with each of our tenders, as a tender submission. So when the tender goes out, you'll have the price bill of quantities, you'll have the method statement, you'll have the program, and then we have other supporting documents as well, which we do, as you know, which are things like CVs, organograms, so management structure charts, that type of thing, and just put it all together into a document that hopefully is a fairly seamless document from start to finish, which will hopefully tempt the client and tempt the design team to want to go for us, assuming the price is right, because it always comes down to price at the end of the day.
Assuming somewhere in there there's not just a consideration of how it's going to be built, but how it's going to be built safely.
Yes, indeed. Certainly health and safety is very much a part of that. Yes, you do need to make sure you're doing it in a safe way. So we would put together logistics drawings and things like that to understand how we're going to do the work, how we're going to sequence it, how we're going to deal with things like access, scaffolding, working at height. Do we need a temporary roof if it's an existing building that's being refurbished? Do we need a temporary roof over the top? And making sure that within that we have enough allowances in there to cover all the things that we're going to need. So yes, certainly very much so. So we would then price the prelims for the job as well when we're going through the tender process and finalising the tender. And that would cover things like staff, it would cover plant, it would cover health and safety, it would cover all those things that you need to put in and make sure that you've got covered. But just trying to make sure that we've got all of it covered and incorporated into the tender. So that's kind of how we would kind of go about it.
As projects get larger, assuming you end up working with bigger and bigger professional subcontractors, how much engagement do you have with them in that early stage?
You would have quite a lot of engagement. Certainly, on some projects, what you might do is you actually might decide to actually work with a subcontractor and engage with them at an early stage. And you might decide that that's your preferred route of dealing with it rather than going to lots of different subcontractors. So for some of the large packages like M&E, maybe timber frame, if it's residential, that sort of type of thing, you'd actually try and embed yourself with that contractor so that you can try and get best price out of that contractor, and hopefully they're not working with anybody else as well. So you can try and get yourself an edge that way by doing that. So yeah, there are ways and means of doing it. It depends on the size, the type, the nature of the job. But partnering up with subcontractors is certainly something that you would consider for some of the larger projects.
Yeah. What's your views and preferred, not just for the business, but preferred outcome for the client between negotiated tender and competitive tender?
Yeah, I think certainly probably the reality of it is that probably 80% or 90% of the work that we price is probably done on a competitive basis, because that's generally the way that it is procured and the way clients prefer for it to be done. And so from that point of view, if you're pricing, that can be delivered to you in certain ways when you're actually, receiving an inquiry. Quite a lot of what we do here is we're just receiving drawings and specification or drawings and scope of works. And we're actually having to measure the whole thing and build quantities together and basically price it off the back of a limited set of drawings and a limited scope of works. So we do that. So to some degree, in that scenario, we have to kind of think of everything anyway. And if that job is being priced by other contractors, they're doing the same thing. But, each contractor could come up with a different result or a slightly different result, and obviously correspondingly a slightly different price. But we have to be thorough, and obviously sometimes the information isn't always that comprehensive, so we end up by putting provisional sums in to cover the things that aren't always that comprehensive and we can't get detailed prices or quotes for. that is kind of a function of what we do. Obviously, clearly negotiated tenders is a preferable way to go. If you can embed yourself with the client and the design team and convince them that that is the way to go, then obviously you're going to be more relaxed about it. You're going to think more carefully about it. You're going to interact with the client and the design team more on a one-to-one basis, on a regular basis, to make sure that everything is covered.
Clients think and often force industry into competitive tender thinking that creates the best outcome, and often only once experiencing the negative outcome of a competitive tender are they then seeking guidance.
I guess it's ultimately it becomes from the fact that the tender, when they're first tendered, the client's aspirations are kind of lived up to by the design team, and the designs are kind of over-egged, if you like, from the point of view of promising more than they can actually afford, promising more than the client can actually afford. So basically the client has all these aspirations, the architect takes them on board, translates them into the drawings, then perhaps embellishes them a bit more, and all of a sudden the costs start to go out of hand, but they don't really necessarily appreciate that or realise that because it hasn't gone to tender at that stage. So further down the line, when it does go to tender, and the different tenderers are pricing it and the prices come back in, they are obviously well over budget. I suppose particularly if we use Capital Close as an example, on Capital Close, that's something that where we, with our close association with the architect, we're able to go back to the architect and say, well, hang on a minute, okay, it's 30, 40, 50% over budget, let's see what we can do to try and bring it back to something that the client will be happy with. Get it to a budget. What is the budget that they're looking for? What is their top whack in terms of price that they're looking to hit? And let's see if we can do something to try and value engineer the project back to try and hit their budget.
What does that process normally look like?
Sitting down with the architect, maybe going to meet the client, sitting down with the client, looking at the drawings that we have from the first stage, basically trying to ascertain, which areas are must-haves, which areas are perhaps areas that could be relaxed on in terms of design. Does the design need to be as elaborate or embellished as it is? Where can we make economies? So, for example, on Capital Close, we've looked at reducing the size of the building slightly, taking 0.5 metre off on one elevation and then 0.5 metre off on another elevation to reduce the gross internal area of the building, try and get the cost down. Things like the windows, going for different manufacturers rather than going for high end, maybe drop down a level, that sort of thing. Just find ways of trying to hit the different budgets.
What's your view of having a QS involved in a project from early stage, and perhaps why do you think that so many residential sites versus commercial decide not to use a QS at all?
Probably a lot of this is decided as due to the size of the job and the client's budget in terms of what the available budget is. And I think, you're probably right that one of the reasons why quite often clients do not go with QSs on projects is because it is considered to be an unnecessary expense. Apart from the fact that the QSs should be there really to administer the contract in a proper way, so the contract is put in place, the QS will administer that and make sure that it is done in the proper way. They'll administer the payment process so that payments are valued accurately and correctly on a monthly basis, and payments are made at the correct time. My experience with working with COO on the type of work that we do at the moment, we don't see QSs involved as much as they perhaps should be. It would be nice to see, more jobs where QSs are involved. But they need to do their jobs correctly as well. They need to, administer their side of things correctly, and they're there for the good of everybody. They're not really there just for the good of the client, but they're there for the good of everybody to manage the processes, manage the finances on the project, manage the payments, manage the contract. So it is administered. It is administered as it should be.
Very few people choose to use a QS because of the additional cost. What's the alternative to get a similar outcome, and what's Karma's preferred route?
part of what we do, if you like, is in terms of business development, is basically engaging with architects and going to meet them, showing them what we can do in terms of our capabilities, showing them particular projects that we have done, showcasing how good we are, and actually getting to a point where we can get some confidence going between ourselves and a particular design practice, so that hopefully when clients are looking to have new work done, that the architect can say, yeah, I know a really good builder, we've worked with them before, or we know what their work is like. Let's go and meet them. Let's go and look at some of their projects, look at some of the work they've done in the past, and basically try and foster good sort of working relationships with architectural practices and with clients to help us to get in front of clients.
It's interesting that you, like I, when I look at a project, build it in your head.
Yeah.
And how have you managed to come to that point where you can do that? That's an incredible skill set.
Well, it comes from experience more than anything, really, from having been there and been involved with it at site level, I suppose. I think one of the key things that that kind of brought it home to me in terms of how to actually, not so much how to build, because I've been in the business for quite a long time, but when I started getting involved with planning and programming, I did a couple of courses with Asta. It's called something else now, EcoSoft, I think it's called. But Power Project, which is one of the planning packages. And what they basically teach you to do is to break a program down into very small sections. So it might be, as you know, when we build our programs, we sort of start off with substructure. We start with site setup, that's a mini program. We start with substructure, that's another mini program. We then start with superstructure, that's another mini program. So what you're doing is you're creating lots of little mini programs in themselves, and then you stitch those together. But what that does is it forces you to analyse each part of the job that you're actually looking to plan and program, and think about those sections individually, and look at the drawings and understand the process from the ground up, literally. And think about the logistics and how you're going to actually do things. And by thinking about it, you can then put those things into the little mini sections of program you're actually doing. And then when you've gone through all of that, you end up with something that becomes a whole program for a job, and just build it from the bottom up in your head. And that is that's how I do it. It's how I've always done it, I suppose. On site, that's living the reality of it. And there often is sometimes, well, I say sometimes, there's quite often there's disparity between, say, a program that was produced at tender stage or at construction stage, right at the start of the project, and how things ultimately get done, because things change as you go along. For me, that's the only way you can actually, I suppose, build a job in reality, is to build the picture in your head first.
Over time, do you think, or has things changed, and has perhaps technology helped improve that planning and pre-planning process?
Well, technology's changed, obviously, with the onset of computers. When I first started out, everything was done by fax and on duplicate bits of paper and this, that, and the other. Yeah, it's certainly, from the days of when I started out, it is certainly very different, and technology, planning, programming, also from a pricing point of view, quantity surveying point of view, instead of having pages and pages of bills that you would have to price manually, from that sort of side of things. And we're not only just seeing it in, the sort of like the pre-construction process and the software packages that are available to us to be able to price jobs and submit tenders and so on and so forth, but you're also seeing it in terms of, technology, in terms of the products and things that you're building into jobs nowadays. Everything is becoming that much more efficient. It's all computer based, it's moving fast, moving forward.
Yeah. Changes in health and safety over the last 20, 30 years, big step forward?
From the way we do things point of view, people are, with changes to the Health and Safety Act, people are being held far more accountable for, misdemeanors and things that go wrong, people having to look at themselves in terms of, planning and, doing things properly. So yeah, health and safety has become a big thing, and it is very important that obviously we ensure that, when guys come to work, they come to work and they work in a safe manner. And not only do they come to work and work in a safe manner, but they also go home safely. So previous companies that I've worked for, they've had sort of, health and safety charters, if you like, if that's what you want to call them. Things like work safe, home safe, those sorts of things, so that, and everybody gets bought into it. So training is a big thing as well from a health and safety perspective now, making sure that people are properly trained. So, for example, ensuring that site managers have their appropriate SMSTS, constant training and updates in relating to things like asbestos awareness, scaffold safety, IPAF, PASMA, those sorts of things. They all are key to operating safely in the industry.
And I guess, Ren, at the beginning of your career, how much of that was considered at a pre-site stage, or was it just not? Right at the beginning of career, I wasn't involved in pre-site. It was obviously considered. It had to be considered. I mean, you couldn't not put a tower crane on a job without pricing to put a tower crane on the job. So yeah, I mean, health and safety would have to have been considered. But I think just things like legislation and all that sort of thing has been tightened up so much that there is a greater level of importance to it, and working and operating safely. So there is a great level of importance to it, and I think also individuals are now having to become more accountable for their own actions. So it's important to realise that and make sure that whoever you are in the industry, whether you're an individual worker or whether you are a subcontractor or a main contractor, that you ensure that your workforce has the appropriate level of training and are responsible for their own actions. Debrief processes and kind of continued learning.
Yeah.
Where have you seen that done really well? What are the main outcomes? What are you trying to achieve by going through that process?
Basically, normally what you do is at the end of a project, you'll agree to have a debrief about sort of 3 to 4 months after the project is finished. By that stage, you should know pretty much where the finances are. The job should have been handed over. Any snags and defects will have been completed. The client's moved in. People have had a chance to understand how the building works, what's gone well, what's not gone well, from a usability point of view, nothing else. So basically what you would do then is engage or have a meeting with all the various stakeholders. So that could be main contractor and key individuals from the main contractor, the client, the design team, so that would be architect, structural engineer, and basically do either what might be called a wash-up meeting or a debrief meeting to work out what's gone well and what's not gone well. And basically, it's a warts and all exercise, really, to discuss the good things about the building, the not so good things, but the good things about the way the job was managed, the subcontractors, look at the subcontractors, analyse the subcontractors, which ones were good, which ones weren't so good, which ones performed well and which ones didn't. And what were the reasons for that? And it's kind of warts and all, and it can open a few eyes to a few things and can get quite personal at times, because, I think when even as individuals, when you are embedded into a project, you tend to be a bit blinkered, and it's often difficult to look outside, the tunnel vision that you perhaps have, because all you're thinking about is getting the job built and finished, and time and cost is a pressure. And you can, fall into the trap of not thinking about the wider sphere of things, if you like, from the point of view, what the client's needs are, or what the client's expectations are. And it can be warts and all, but it can be very revealing. And from a learning point of view and a learning exercise, it's worth doing. Very much worth doing.
Well, I guess from a pre-site point of view, that reflection at the end of the project is inherently important in terms of refining that selection process.
Yeah. I mean, internally, from our own point of view, you're absolutely right. As a sort of a cost exercise, if you like, going through back and looking at where things went wrong, where they didn't go wrong, or where they were good. yeah, you can certainly learn from that, and particularly doing an in-depth cost review. You say at tender stage where perhaps you undercooked it a little bit, or you overcooked it, or over-egged it, and where you could do better next time when you're pricing. That's for sure. Yeah, it's certainly on the bigger jobs. It's worth doing an exercise to sort of review how the job went, both internally and with the client.
Nice.
Yeah.